Joel Skousen actually wrote the book on strategic relocation, and you with KHQN and Channel 17 are smart enough to listen. Originating from the number 2 moderate growth, medium-sized metro area, Provo, Utah, at the fabulous Rock Canyon Studios, this is the World Affairs Brief. Joel's co-hosts are Paul A. Jensen and Tom Drashall.
Good morning, folks, and we're happy to have you with us this morning here on the World Affairs Brief with our wonderful expert guest, Mr. Joel Skousen, who is the editor of the World Affairs Brief, which comes out every single Friday, and we're glad to have you with us this morning, Joe. And we also have Mr. Tom Drashall with us from East Texas, and Tom is also on the air with us this morning. Very interesting World Affairs Brief. I told Joel this morning, I told Tom that after reading that first episode on the World Affairs Brief that I'm going to go ahead and arrange to move to Bangladesh, because I think this country is just going down so fast and things are tipping over towards the powers that be agenda so quickly that I just don't know where to go. Now, folks, before we hear from Joel, if you have any questions for our staff here this morning, and especially for Joel Skousen, any questions or comments, you can call us toll-free at 1-800-776-1913. That's 1-800-776-1913. Joel, let's get into this first story. What's happening to this nation? What's happening with these all these news stories, and just so quickly things are escalating to almost a socialistic society? Maybe you have an explanation on that.
Well, what this indicates today, and what I'm going to cover, is that the Democrats, and it's not really the Democratic or Republican Party so much as it's the globalist controllers who control both these parties and the President of the United States. They now realize that they have sufficient power to move ahead and start to move ahead much more rapidly. You think it's been moving fast now. It's going to start moving a lot faster now that they have taken more power to them. And it starts out with the story that Secretary of State John Kerry announced the demise or that they were withdrawing the Monroe Doctrine as a U.S. foreign policy. This basically ends 100 years of a very wise policy that essentially warned off foreign nations to keep their hands off America. Russia, of course, had long violated that doctrine. Relative to Cuba, the U.S. did nothing, and more recently, China's also made considerable inroads into Latin America, especially Panama and Brazil and Venezuela, and the U.S. announcement basically says it's okay. It was therefore fitting that Venezuela's leftist-controlled Congress granted President Maduro the power to rule free to save their economy, which is set by rampant inflation, about 40% a year down there. And it was a similar but broader rule by decree called the Diktat that launched Hitler on his path to power in Germany after, interesting enough, another inflationary fiasco in the Weimar Republic. Well, Venezuela is not America, but the Democrats pushed through their version of ruling by decree this week as Senator Harry Reid successfully passed a majority rule change in the Senate that took away the filibuster on the 2/3 majority necessary to, or the 60 votes necessary to confirm Obama's appointments that require consent of the Senate. So this check and balance is gone forever, and it will, and this is very significant because, there are 50 radical judges that Obama has proposed for federal and district courts and appeals courts, and they will all be confirmed now, and they've been held up by Republicans to this point, and now they're all going to be confirmed. We've already got a majority of judges that rule in lockstep with government. This is going to cement that majority of judges even further.
Joel, what we have here is 1789 is the filibuster rule when it was put in place by Congress, and now we have this other Monroe Doctrine being eliminated, 100-year standing. What does that spell for the future? How easy is it going to be for the controlling party? And I assume that the conservatives from here on out are not going to be in the majority party. What's going to happen when they have these agendas that they want to push through Congress?
Well, the importance of the filibuster rule was that it means that you could, if you couldn't change the law, if you couldn't improve things, at least you could stop any further damage because you could block things. It didn't take a majority to block bad law or block bad appointments. It only took a minority of at least a third, and that's what they've now eliminated. And so, it means that they have the clear majority. They're going to use it to rubber stamp everything that comes out of the White House now. And I emphasize that Obama alone is not driving these changes. I keep trying to tell conservatives Obama is not the issue. He's merely a puppet for people behind the scenes that are dictating and controlling and telling him what to say, just as George W. Bush was a puppet of those same people, even though he was a Republican. So it's important not to fall into the trap of saying or thinking that if we just got rid of Obama, we could solve our problems.
As a matter of fact, John Boehner seems to be on their team.
That's right. As I pointed out in the brief, a lot of conservatives take consolation in the fact that the House is in the hands of the Republicans, but leaders like John Boehner are shills for government, shills for the globalists, and they only pretend to oppose what the Democrats are pushing. At the most critical moments in history, they scuttle the work of true conservatives, and nothing demonstrated this more clearly when Boehner capitulated on the debt ceiling and the government shutdown last month without a single concession. He didn't extract one, he just gave in. And by cutting and running, he allowed the Republicans to take all the blame for the shutdown. And he so poisoned the process of standing up to more government debt that it won't ever happen again. And so it was a masterful, crafted deception that has literally undermined our ability to stop this debt juggernaut.
This whole thing, that's going on.
Yeah.
I should say that this whole thing that's going on in the Senate is. I've got to. It's historically the filibuster and the senatorial courtesy rule, whereby the one single senator can control effectively what he does. He just says to the president, all the other senators are going to go along with me. They won't ratify your federal district judge nominees unless in my particular state. If you're the same party as the president and the senators and the district judge being chosen from your state, then you can effectively veto that. So the senators get to choose that. But both that and the filibuster rule are just, they're not something that's in the Constitution. They're not even statutorial. It's just a matter of something that the Senate has always agreed on. It's their idea that we as individuals are important enough. We're not going to be cut off. We're going to give each other a lot of power by backing up each other in these ways with the filibuster and the senatorial courtesy. And I have to wonder out loud, what's going on here? How did they get the Senate to go along with it? And what is it they're trying to do? I mean, maybe they think, well, we'll just change it back in the future if the control changes. But I believe that the real major thing here is just to stop to stop Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul from exercising filibuster power. It was fine as long as things were controllable and people would kind of go along. But you got these guys saying, okay, we're going to use it, and we will literally commit
we're down
political suicide if necessary.
We're down to 10 seconds on the radio, gentlemen, and we'll catch this answer during the TV portion.
First of all, they do want to shut down the lone voice of Ron Paul or Ted Cruz or Mike Lee, because the filibuster is very effective in drumming or in promoting the single cause that the person speaking before the Senate for hours on end is able to have a tremendous education value, and that's they're going to eliminate, I think, the entire filibuster eventually in the future. There's a lot of bad blood in the Senate about this betrayal, but the Republicans can't do anything about it. The Democrats, frankly, are teaming up as a bloc and saying, we're just going to stop all of this minority building. And I think it's because there's a permanent sea change. That's my point. We've permanently now lost the majority as conservatives. We're in a constant minority. So it's now time. I mean, it used to be that they'd switch back and forth, Republican control. I don't think we'll ever see Republican control of the Senate again. And so they're going to change the rules. in favor of the majority party, and I think
well, that's right. But it's not just in favor of the majority party. It's in favor of the powers that be. It's in favor of the the leadership of both. The leadership of the Republicans have gone along with this. That's the point. It couldn't have happened without the Republicans going along with it. They could have filibustered this, and they could have. But the leadership doesn't want individuals anymore to be able to have that much. I'm talking about the Republican leadership. They could have stopped this in the Senate. They didn't do it, just like Boehner's not doing it in the House right now, because they don't like what Ted Cruz and these other mavericks, Mike Lee and Rand Paul, have shown that they're willing to do here now and in the future.
We're down to 15 seconds before we go live again on radio. We're still live on television, and you can call us at 1-800-776-1913.
The Republican leadership doesn't like what Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul are doing any more than the Democrats like it. That's the problem, along with the Democrats.
So they sat on their hands.
Well, I have a question for you, Joel, and that is that what are the things, according to the World Affairs Brief, you've got some things listed here that are actually on the table or coming quickly or soon to Congress that could really damage the constitutional position of this nation. What are some of those things that now they're going to be able to push through very quickly, some specific bills?
Well, I already mentioned the 50 judicial nominations.
Yes.
These are important because it is the fact, and as I'll talk about in several occasions in the brief, is the increasing presence of liberal justices sitting on the courts of the nation that have stopped or refused to stop police abuse of citizens and sanction police for tasering too many people and for outright abuse and for taking away people's constitutional rights and for unjustified warrantless searches. The judges are not sanctioning police. And so the more of these judges we have at the local level, at the federal district court level, the less justice you're going to be able to even have at the state level. This is a very serious thing. Number two is...
one quick comment on that. It's a big deal. People in America still think we have the rule of law. They think we have judges out there that they don't realize that back Clinton himself appointed hundreds and hundreds, such a large percentage of the federal judiciary when he was doing it. Now Obama's doing it, and they're all, as Joel said in the brief, virtually pure leftists that are in there. We don't have rule of law here. We have literally a bunch of Gadianton robbers in there. In the judgeships of the nation, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of federal district judges, as well as.
Let me give you a comment on that. I know from firsthand experience. I've seen it. I've been involved in the court system like you have, Tom. And the issue is that there's supposed to be a prosecution. There's supposed to be a defense, and there's supposed to be a neutral third party that is a judge. And if you think that judge is a neutral party, he goes down on the first floor every Friday and picks up his paycheck with the prosecutors. He is not neutral. He is, and especially in the case that you're talking about, these appointees by Clinton and Obama, and even some of the Bush appointees, many of them. It is not fair and equitable. We are not a nation of law anymore, and we've seen that over and over again with this administration.
Big deal, yeah, that's right.
And I think that's a good point that Paul made, that in fact most of the appointments by President George W. Bush were in fact closet liberals. I mean, like John Roberts. I mean, he really is a blackmailed judge who does the bidding of the establishment when called upon. And it isn't a true conservative.
Including Obamacare.
That's right. I mean, but, this ENDA bill, the anti-discrimination bill that adds homosexuals and transgender persons to the list of protected people in regards to employment and housing, is very, very dangerous. It denies individuals in business the right to disassociate with persons they object to. It gives these parties protected status in the military and dismantles laws that limit public bathrooms to traditional genders. Experience has shown that those who hold anti-homosexual views become liable under the law and results in a new persecuted class, stripped of their freedom of speech and the freedom of association and disassociation relative to these protected classes. So don't underestimate how bad these anti-discrimination laws are, because they not only simply give them entrance into areas by denying people the ability to say no to hiring or to renting to people they object to. But it makes a new persecuted class out of Christians and ministers who may ever utter the politically incorrect doctrine that homosexuality is not approved by God.
This is another huge, huge deal. For decades and decades now, as long as we've had any kind of civil rights movements and so on, we've had these areas of inherent characteristics, race, religion, sex, national origin, that are sacrosanct, and they bring in strict scrutiny. If we're going to have any kind of law that's going to discriminate on the basis of race, religion, sex, and national origin, you got to have very strict scrutiny and so on. The homosexual and transgender and so on, LGBT, they have wanted to get in. They have wanted to be an inherent, and the Supreme Court has consistently refused to do so. I mean, there's a few things that have broken a little bit, but for the most part, they've still kept them off of that list of protected categories that you're talking about. And now, without doing it through the Supreme Court, the Congress is going to change these, basically changing the Constitution by including homosexuals in this list of inherent characteristics and protected groups, as you say. This is another big deal.
Well, now, before we have you respond to that, Joel, I just want to remind our listeners that they're here on the World Affairs Brief with Joel Skousen. And we have got an offer for you from Joel that if you want a free copy of this issue, today's issue, which is a very important issue, the only thing you have to do is email just editor@worldaffairsbrief.com, editor@worldaffairsbrief.com, and you can receive a free copy, and that's very generous of you, Joel. Also, if you want to subscribe at a very, very nominal fee, less than $1 an issue, you get 52 issues, one a week, and you go to worldaffairsbrief.com and just press on the subscribe button. Now, there's the next one in line here, and you may want to respond more to Enda, but the next thing online, I thought that the immigration reform was kind of put on the back burner, but is that true, Joel?
Well, I do want to respond to the end of the thing. I just want to point out that it's very important to understand, in terms of the philosophy of law, that there's a difference between government's inability to discriminate, because all taxpayers and various things, pay to government. Government can discriminate, for example, against homosexualities if there's a security risk for something, but not because of the act itself. Whereas individuals have to have the universal right to discriminate. Even if we disagree, they should, even though government cannot discriminate by race, color, creed, etc., and creed, they really should be able to discriminate, because if you're a Marxist, there's a security threat there to government. They should be able to discriminate against creed in that regard. But individuals have the absolute right to discriminate for any reason whatsoever. And even though we may disagree with making a class racial judgment, individuals have the right. Just like free speech, we may disagree with what they say, but we have to defend people's right to say it, especially on their own property. And that's the interesting thing that we lost in the civil rights movement, is the legal interpretation that a person's business is no longer private if you're open to the public, and therefore they applied the same rules of government anti-discrimination to business or any public entity, even though businesses aren't truly public, even when they serve a portion of the public. So I think people need to understand and not get caught up in the fact that what is now presented as saying that government can't discriminate, and therefore individuals can't discriminate. There is a difference in law.
It's a big deal in America. We've always been able to discriminate on, as you say, on a personal basis. We have the constitutional right of association. We have the right in America to be bigots as individuals if we want, and to go to hell if that's what happens to people. But that's God's judgment and not the government's judgment in America. But the government now is making it their judgment, so that we're basically looking at thought control here, which is real close to 100% government control of everything.
And so, what about these businesses? What about these businesses that have a religious right, supposedly, who do not want to distribute abortion materials or anything else in their businesses are now being forced by the federal government to go against
their
constitutional
right for freedom of exercise of your religion, and yet the government's taking that away with this kind of thing.
Yes, they have, and that's because, as I say, we lost in the civil rights. They made the determination that businesses are not private anymore if they're open to the public, and so they're making that same thing. Now, one court has disagreed with the Obamacare ruling, and that's why it's in limbo right now, waiting for the Supreme Court to rule. But one court has disagreed and correctly said that even though a business is open to the public, if the owners are religious, the owners of chicken franchise, for example, object to this, then it's a violation of their rights, even though they're acting as a business, and that is a correct legal interpretation.
Right.
Well, this comprehensive immigration reform is looming up again. Basically, it was dead on arrival in the House because there is no sentiment to pass this comprehensive immigration reform bill. But John Boehner, as usual, is setting the stage for betrayal of his Republican majority, conservative majority in the House. He's always said that he wouldn't even bring up a bill to a vote unless the majority of Republicans support it. He violated that rule on the shutdown bill, and he's poised to do it again on immigration reform. That's, of course, a euphemism for more amnesty for illegals.
Now, Joel, is there 11 million illegals, or is there more like 20 or 30 million? Why are they putting the number so low?
Well, it's interesting. When they were first talking about the need for immigration reform and pushing, they said there are 20 to 30 million people out there who are illegals who need to have some justice. And now that they're trying to get it passed, they want to downplay the number, so they're talking about 11 million illegals. That is grossly underestimated. There's at least double that, and most likely upwards of 30 million.
I tell you, we got 11 million here in Texas, for Pete's sake.
Are you guys? Are you gentlemen being politically correct? I thought they were undocumented aliens.
Undocumented workers that don't like to use aliens.
Workers. There
now,
you go.
I want to say personally, I've had tremendously good relationships with Mexicans who are here. They're hard workers. They've taken over almost all of the jobs. And not only because they work cheaper, they work harder and better. But
absolutely all true, especially down here.
Yes.
I speak Spanish. Most of them are good people, but there is a percentage that are coming over that are criminals. There are coyotes who run this underground pipeline, who are evil, who bring in drugs, who have extreme criminal records, and who are filling up a great many prisons at state expense. And you just have to be able to, have a true immigration system which keeps these criminal elements out. And I happen to be, as a libertarian, believe that we should have more open immigration, but with very strict controls that are operated by people and liability rather than government. What I mean by that is the proper way to do that is, I have the right to deal with.
Let me interrupt you for just a second. Let you continue. We're down at a hard break. You're still on television, okay. Joe. We've got 3 minutes until we're back live on the radio. Why don't you go ahead and continue with that thought?
Yeah, what I wanted to say was that as a free individual, my rights to negotiate and make contracts with people outside don't stop at the border. I have a right to negotiate with anybody around the world. Now, the government has the right to intervene only if there's a national security risk in my dealings with other people or bringing people into the country. But there should be a commensurate liability for people. And this is like going back to the old sponsorship system, that I should be able to sponsor a worker, but sponsorship doesn't mean I agree that he's a good person and bring him in, and once you bring him in, he's on his own. No, I think a sponsorship should mean much higher responsibility, that I agree to be totally responsible for his conduct, as well as his housing, his welfare, while he's here, and that if anything goes awry there, I'm responsible, and my citizenship's on the line. So in other words, there'd be a great deal of liability for people bringing in, it wouldn't bother me if I could trust people. And so every person bringing another person would be extremely careful to make sure that they were not criminals, because their citizenship and liability would be on the line if they make a mistake. It would also raise the price so that it wouldn't be as cheap to bring in cheap labor, because you'd have the responsibility of caring for them and making sure that, that they stay within the bounds of the law, et cetera. And so more equally balance, the hiring of in-country workers versus out-of-country workers.
Another point here, even if all the people coming in are angels, if there were no crooks whatsoever, we only have so many agents. You have to, if you're going to have a order in society, then you have to limit it, whether it's 1 million or 1.5 million new immigrants total every year. You only have so many bureaucrats who can work with them to help them do that. And if you're allowing the illegals to come in like this, of course, then you're allowing people to jump ahead in the line. And we're talking about tens of millions of people jumping ahead. I used to help people getting their citizenship from down in Mexico, and the bottom line is that it doesn't matter how wonderful or bad the people are. Even if they're great, you've got to be able to limit the numbers, and otherwise you have chaos, and you don't have rule of law anymore here in America.
30 seconds.
Well, my point is, though, that if you have a free market system where every person is liable for what he brings in and things, then you don't need all the bureaucrats to monitor those. It goes back to the judicial. They make a mistake, it goes back to the person who sponsored them, and there's a great deal of incentive there to make sure that you have self-screening. It doesn't self-qualify. It becomes self-responsible individuals.
There's something that concerned me here. I've got a very good friend who's gone outside of this country because he's only on Social Security, and he's found a way to live outside of the country as an expatriate in a very good fashion. And you're talking about laws here that are shutting people in the country as well as shutting people out. And they're doubling the number of border agents. Why didn't they do that before when this was a real issue? I'll let you go with that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, here, when you really needed to stop illegal immigration, and I happen to have had several contacts in Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, who told me we got orders from the White House to not prosecute, to not stop people from coming in. They were letting the border be like a sieve. Now that they're going to lock down this immigration and comprehensive, they're going to double the number of Border Patrol agents. And it won't be to stop illegals to coming in. It will be basically, to harass people going back and forth in the country with newer travel controls, and that's what I'm worried about. They're talking about shutting people out who have become expatriates, not letting them back in the country. They're talking about not being able to leave the country. Tom, you'll be interested in this, unless you have a valid U.S. passport. I mean, since when did you have to show a passport to leave?
I lived there on the border for years. You don't have to have anything. You don't have to have a driver's license, anything to leave the country. In fact, you didn't have to have anything to come back into the country either. You just stated you were a U.S. citizen. But to drive over, you just drove over to Mexico. They wave you through. You come back. They ask. This is a huge change on the border.
That's right. So what I think it's what Ron Paul said, about, border controls. They could be used to lock you in as well as keep other people out. I just don't trust where our government is headed on this, and I think Boehner is going to betray us. One of the things, there was an interchange between the White House and Boehner, and Obama was talking about being willing to allow these laws or immigration reform to be done piecemeal or point by point, and that's what Boehner's going to do. He's going to say like he's rejecting the Senate bill, which he will, but he'll end up passing it piecemeal, and what he doesn't pass will go before a conference committee. A conference committee is special representatives in the House that are chosen to bang out the differences between the Senate bill and the House, and they usually end up compromising and putting back in things that the House never approved of. Then it comes as a up or down, pass or fail, accept it or leave it to both houses to pass the compromise, and there's a tremendous pressure to pass the compromise legislation once it's been negotiated.
Joel, you reported this $46.3 billion for increased border control. It's an unbelievable amount of money for border control. We used to joke down there that to stop the to really control the border, you'd have to have the whole U.S. military lock elbows on the whole 2,000-mile border down there. With $46 billion, you could hire enough guys to lock elbows and have a double and triple fence built also. $46 billion for border control. What are they going to do with it?
Yeah, well, they're not going to use it for what we want. I mean, it's just, they're not going to stop the border. They're not going to continue to build the fence. I'm afraid it's going to be part of the Homeland Security, Gestapo that they're building against American citizens someday.
Yeah.
Okay. So a question again on this, is China softening, or are they deceiving the West? Are they softening their policies? Are they becoming more democratic or conservative, or is that just a deception?
People have more children?
Yes, the issue of allowing...
this past week, of course, they appeared to be softening by claiming to allow more than one child, 2 children, to those that were only children. In other words, they're penalizing those that broke the law before. But I'm skeptical about this. Sun Tzu was the great Chinese military philosopher, and he talked about, feigning weakness before you strike, offering the hand of friendship to mask the betrayal that's coming, and I'm convinced that's what they're up to. First of all, it's extremely inappropriate for Chinese and the government to dictate to anyone how many children that you can have. And forced abortion is practiced upon those who slip up or evade the policy. And one of the other unintended consequences is that female babies are aborted at a rate of about 2 to 1 over male babies, because they want to, if they're only going to get 1 child or 2 children, they want to make sure they get a male baby to carry on the family name. They have not rejected their 1 child per family policy for everyone, and so it's rather a situation in gradual flux. But what I'm saying is that this is done for pragmatic reasons. What's happening in China is that the forced 1-child policy has worked all too well. China's in a steep population decline now, and the ratio of old people to youth is way out of whack. There aren't enough young workers in China to feed the export economy, even though it's flat right now, and they've got a military problem as well. China's in full armament production and must increase the army by several million men before they launch their planned strike. And where are the young men? They're just not there anymore.
And Joel, I saw a documentary 2 weeks ago that the problem with the women is even worse. There is kidnappings by the hundreds and the thousands for men to find a wife, and they have these associations that'll go out and find you a wife, and it's nothing short of going to another community, another city, and finding a woman. They don't care if she's married or single. They'll kidnap her and take her 100 miles or 1,000 miles away, because there are no women to marry because of this abortion policy with the women. I thought that was really interesting.
That's right. It's just a gross distortion, and there's a great deal of backlash there. As for China's claim that it will end its controversial re-education in labor camps, that was part of this softening of the image. There's a complete lack of proof on this. Most of the current camps are kept secret from the West, so how will the outside world know if this reform really happens? When the so-called fall of the Soviet Union happened, the camps did not go away. They claimed that everyone was free now, but the camps went on, and communism still is in power there and resurging. Chinese human rights activists have been watching the camps grow for years, but have had little support from the Western media, who always continue to bend over backwards to downplay the Chinese threat. Anyway, they claim that there's 2 million people in these detentions at any given time, but Chinese activists say there are about 10 million in camps, and they're being used to produce products sold in America, as I detailed in the November 8th World Affairs Brief.
Joel, how does that work? We call them camps, and I think of, gulags, like they were in Russia and so on, and yet it appears that they have just regular prisoners in these camps also. How many of them are political? How many of them are legal prisoners and so on?
Criminal.
criminals?
Well, nobody knows. Nobody knows. We do know that a good portion of them are political prisoners because that's the major reason. And they do have some separation between criminals in camps, unlike the gulags, which used criminals to intermix with political prisoners so that the criminals would essentially act as persecutors and make life difficult for the politicos. But they do have some separation of prisons in China.
You got to give it to the Chinese leadership. I mean, these guys are really effective. They pretty much have their way. They have a system set up where they can just do whatever they want. Same with the one-child policy or the sometimes two-child policy, with the ones that you want. The point is that any kind of control of children, any kind of state birth control there is the right to just eliminate whoever you individuals and groups that you don't that disagree with, that you don't like, to just kill them, eliminate those kinds of people, and the same thing with, or to put them in jail, or to put, you don't know who's a criminal and who's a political prisoner. That's a scary place to be.
It really is. You know, Joel, I have a question. What about this big high-level meeting that they had, this policy meeting to set policy for the next 5 years? What happened there? Is that are we getting the truth out of their decisions? Is it another deception?
Well, I think the entire meeting was a political ploy. It was political theater to come out with major changes that would impress the world on how China is changing. And as I pointed out in the brief, I don't have time to go into it today, but there are some monetary changes, too, about not accepting any more dollars or any more foreign currency. They're not going to allow their foreign exchanges pool, which is now almost $3.6 billion, to rise anymore. They're having trouble.
Trillion.
But I would really like to move on and explain some very interesting analysis I did in the brief on the claims of World Bank insiders.
Yeah, I was really wanting to go there. That was one of the most interesting stories. Now, how do you know
this is the legit?
I was just going to ask the story claims of the World Bank insider Kerry. Now, is it Hudis or Huds, or how do you pronounce her last name?
Hudis.
Okay.
Right. In any case, she's a legitimate whistleblower. She talked about how the World Bank has issued over $100 billion in bonds on the world's capital markets, but there's a lot of financial irregularities. There's a lot of slush funds and payoffs being involved with the World Bank, a lot of bribing of World Bank members who, they let every country that's a signatory to the World Bank have a seat on the board. So there's hundreds of representatives on the board, and they control them by blackmailing them. But with all of her expertise on that, she's right on target. But like many whistleblowers who start to get a glimpse of the global control system, they start to see this corruption, they start to see the backlash they get for being a whistleblower, they start to dig deeper and they say, ooh, there's a globalist agenda here, and these people are globalists I've been dealing with. And then they begin to read a lot of material, some of it good, some of it bad. And like others, Hudis has begun to make statements claiming to understand the broader conspiracy, and but I have problems with the claims.
Joel, we're going to have to interrupt. We're down to a hard break again, and we will go ahead and talk through the break on television for the 2 minutes.
I'm thinking out loud. It may be helpful for our listeners to delineate the difference between the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the Fed. I mean, all of whom play a huge part. All central banks play a huge part, and the Bank of International Settlements. What's the difference between the World Bank, the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements? How do they overlap?
Well, they overlap in the sense that the same globalists who control and set up the World Bank control the IMF, and they have similar, almost identical functions. Both of them make loans to other countries. Both of them control those countries when they become in default of the loans by requiring that they change, aspects. And some of those changes they require, frankly, are good because they're loaning money to socialist countries who then go bankrupt, and so they require that they do austerity measures like they have been doing with Greece and otherwise, who all have both IMF and World Bank loans. So as I pointed out in my problems with some of her claims, they do, in fact, like to get other nations in debt to the World Bank and the IMF because it allows them to control those countries once they get into trouble with that debt. And But she'll make other statements in here about wanting to keep the U.S. in debt, and that isn't true. Debt has a very real purpose, but it isn't for the same reason they want to keep other countries in debt. Basically, my explanation is within this country, domestically, they like debt because it allows them to evade taxing people directly for unpopular programs. If you were to give people...
Welcome back to the World Affairs Brief with Joel Skousen, our expert, and our co-host, Tom Drashel, and I'm Paul Jensen. We're here to talk about, continuing to talk about the claims of some corruption and other things aside. Why don't you go ahead and just give us a synopsis of what we talked about during the brief for those who didn't hear it on the radio over the past 2 minutes.
Well, we're talking about her claim that the people who control the World Bank and the IMF are essentially the same international financiers, the globalists that we're talking about, and that she says basically they want to keep the United States into debt, but in fact they want to keep the rest of the world into debt, and that's why they set up these two international lending agencies for third world countries, because they do control them. But within the United States, it's a different policy. They like debt, not because of the indebtedness to the nation so much as the fact that it allows them to bypass taxing people. If they were to tax people for wars and for foreign aid, and you got a bill every year for $5,000 for every man, woman, and child in your home, you would rebel. And they avoid that by simply doing this with debt. And they keep postponing it down the road. So the thing that worries about them, of course, is reaching the limit of debt, which is where you can't pay the interest anymore.
And let me just make a quick comment about that. We talk about postponing it down the deal. It shouldn't be postponed. They've already gotten paid back immediately when they create the money and they buy T-bills and inject the money into our society. They automatically have gotten all their money back because they have. We say that we're kicking it down the road. We don't really. I say we really don't owe the Federal Reserve anything. They've just diluted our money supply. They took it right out of our pockets instantly when they created the money and bought the T-bills, and so. It's true. It just inflates the money supply, but it's not as if anybody intends to ever pay it off.
Well, that's really not what we're talking about. There's a difference between the interest owed to the Fed, which is mostly paid back into the Treasury, except for a percentage fee that they keep for their services, and the interest that is paid to bondholders who buy into our debt. That's the interest that I'm talking about that is looming ever larger and will consume all tax funds approximately by the year 2028 to 2030, depending on that's the deadline that they're up against. And of course, fewer and fewer people are buying bonds because most of the bonds are being bought by the Fed, so the system's getting kind of convoluted now. What I see is they're just trying to postpone the collapse of debt collapse into a period when they can have war that will give them cover for that. And that's why she makes the outlandish statement and you hear it all over the internet, that the powers that be are trying to collapse the dollar. They could collapse the dollar any time. In the past 20 years, all they'd have to do is stop inflating the money supply, and a collapse would begin immediately. And there is no evidence whatsoever that the powers that be are trying to collapse the dollar. In fact, they're supporting it with what I consider, fairly moderate rates of inflation, something under 10%, a real rate of inflation 6 to 7%. I'm not saying that that's good or that's legal. It isn't. But nevertheless, if they keep it about that level, they can continue to bail out nations and not create hyperinflation, which is another claim that people are making. But some of her more outlandish claims are that 40% of our tax dollars, go directly to the UK and 60% go to the Vatican. I mean, this is absolutely bogus. Yes, the City of London, which is a city within London, the greater metropolitan area, and it's long been controlled by international bankers since the Middle Ages. The Vatican Bank is deeply as well involved in international corruption and collusion, but this claim that the UK and the Vatican having first claim on U.S. tax money is simply ludicrous. The Fed keeps the world financial system afloat with creating new money. There's no necessity to grab U.S. tax receipts and physically ship them overseas to other countries. And that's not how things work on the dark side of government. It indicates that she's either read some bogus book on the subject, but doesn't have real, true insider information on this.
Joel,
she claims finance. Yes.
Well, I don't. Maybe you're going to be, if we can have time to cover all of them. But today's the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination. I was fascinated. I thought it was a great, at least coincidence, if not planned, that you mentioned here. You talked about her claims about Lincoln issuing greenbacks and JFK killing, also trying to cut the Fed out of the process. I'm hoping you have time to cover those in light of the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination here.
Well, it is very important because in the 50th year, of course, supposedly the secret files on JFK's assassination are to be finally released from the archives. And, the mainstream media is flooding the media with false answers to the conspiracy claims to make it look. And I think they're just trying to cover the waves with false information so that they don't give coverage to anybody who finally gets access. And I don't know if they're going to actually allow people to have access, because it's going to blow this thing wide open if they...
Well, yeah, I think the average American that's watching it, they believe that, hey, we know now it was George Hickey. I think most people believe the smoking gun deal, that it was an accidental shot by a Secret Service agent, and that explained it's because of all the information that's being released, and it'll just go away now. No one will demand that we have all the information.
And there's a big story on WorldNet Daily that it was JFK. I mean, it was LBJ. And
right, and it wasn't LBJ. I mean, LBJ was involved, but he wasn't running this. It wasn't the secret insurgent. I mean, this was a government hit on the president, multiple shooters.
Yeah,
right.
And but what I'm saying is that they derailed the truth by simply flooding us with false conspiracy theories, and that's what she's being fed with. She says he was killed for erasing the interest on the U.S. debt and trying to cut the Fed out of the process, and that's not true. He was trying to dismantle secret operations by the Fed. It's a massive conspiracy. Nobody knows exactly why the government took him down. It could even have been the martyr effect to try to get a massive increase in the socialist New Society or Great Society program, which passed after he was dead out of the martyr effect. But there's a tremendous amount of complexity in this. She pushes this false point of view, for example, that if only we just let the Treasury inflate money like Lincoln did, and she's claiming that Lincoln was killed because he's going to stop inflating the Treasury and was resisting the big bankers taking over the inflation process. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. But my point is, philosophically, it's as improper for the Treasury to issue fiat money as it is the Federal Reserve, and it doesn't do anything more for sovereignty or liberty to let the Treasury steal people's money by issuing fiat money.
That's true. We need to have gold and silver backed money backed by physical commodity and so on. But and it's still bad for us to do it, for us to deficit spend ourselves and issue fiat currency. But at least it gets rid of the central bankers' involvement in the thing and paying interest to central bankers making money by allowing them to create money. It's still bad for us.
Remember that interest. Most of that interest is returned to the U.S. Treasury. They only keep about 3%, so it's not the huge amount that it appears.
Okay,
fair enough.
Gentlemen, we're down to 3 minutes, and I'm just going to have to remind our listeners that you have got to subscribe to the World Affairs Brief to get the whole story. This story is much more extensive than we've had the time to talk about, and you can even receive a free issue, the free copy of this issue, by writing to editor@worldaffairsbrief.com, and Joe will shoot you out your free copy of this issue. If you want to subscribe, to go to worldaffairsbrief.com and click on subscribe. Now, some of the other stories that you have not heard today, one is that the schools and the hospitals are claiming sovereign powers over our children. You're going to want to learn more about that. And then we also, there's a lot of discussion about the increase of the police state. There were several stories this week that were very disturbing. The Middle East, Joel, we're getting closer to war over there, according to the brief. And then Obama has made a mockery of the Medal of Freedom and then also corruption in the government. Of those four stories, we've got about 2.5 minutes. What would you like to cover?
As I look
well, I'm going to cover the corruption of the Medal of Freedom.
Okay.
First of all, about half of the people on the Medal of Freedom are people who betrayed liberty. Everybody from
highest civilian honor,
Bill Clinton to Gloria Steinem, the feminist leader, radicals, Martin Luther King, who was the most hypocritical reverend in the world, who was with prostitutes almost every night, who converted with communists, gave medals of freedom, of course, posthumously to a lot of presidents like Gerald Ford,
early in Oprah Winfrey's career.
Warren Commission, who
her bosses told her she should
Jimmy
change
Carter,
her name
did more damage to liberty in the world than any president in terms of allowing
I have to pause here to say I got the same advice.
And then he gave the rest of the awards to music people.
They didn't say I should be named Susie,
but
music
awards, and that has nothing to do with liberty. And here you've downgraded the concept of liberty.
People can relate to Susie.
Medals to musicians.
That's what they said.
How great they were, like
it turned out, surprisingly, that
but those people have no business
Oprah
getting the Medal of Freedom.
In more than
Did you mention
4,500 episodes of her show,
Oprah's in here.
her message
was always a shock every time you see who gets a Medal of Freedom.
You can do.
It's like giving the Congressional
you can grow,
Medal of Honor to these people. It makes just as much sense.
Well, that and the Nobel Peace Prize going to Obama when he was first elected president.
Right.
But even with 40 Emmys,
it just shows that this is a political process,
black female billionaire,
and that
Oprah's greatest
people
strength has always been
to these committees
her ability
who's going to get these
to help us
awards,
discover the best in ourselves.
It's for
Michelle and I count ourselves
propaganda purposes.
Many devoted fans,
that's what we're dealing with
friends.
now.
But what it shows is that the average American is just not paying attention at all, or they'd say, "My gosh, this guy and all the other politicians are just crazy. They're not doing their jobs. They're not paying any attention to the Constitution, to the rule of law, to our traditions of the congressional freedom for medals for civilians and so on. Just nobody's doing their job. They're all doing whatever they want, using government for their own purposes, and we're letting them get away with it. American people just don't seem to be paying attention.
Well, gentlemen, we are out of time today, and we'll see you next Friday at 8 a.m. here on the World Affairs Brief, and we're glad to have you with us. And thanks, Joel, and thanks, Tom, for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.